All right, hey everyone. My name is Neil, and I'm the CEO of Vertical. We're best known by our product PlaceNote SDK. So if you've heard about PlaceNote, we're the guys that built it, and if you haven't heard about it, well, I'll tell you what it's all about today. So let me start my talk with a little bit of a scenario here, if this worked. Do I need to point this at something? Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Let me check if there's
Okay. There you go. All right.
Thank you.
All right. So let me start with a little bit of a scenario. Right? You walk into a new office and you go up to the coffee machine just as it's run out of coffee. Right? And you think to yourself, OK, I'm a smart person. I can figure this out. Add coffee. Where do I add the coffee? All right, where's the coffee? All right, I found the coffee. Where do I put it? Where do I actually add water? Do I need to add the cup first or turn on the water first? Why are there two nozzles? Or maybe this one's more familiar. You walk into Home Depot and you think, OK, I want to buy a 2-foot by 4-foot, 4-centimeter thick MDF board. Easy, right? Only if you can find an expert in your section who can tell you exactly where it is. So the funny thing is that over the last 10 years, user interface design in web and mobile has gotten so good and so intuitive that it's almost second nature to us. But yet, when you think about our daily interactions in the real world, like digging through the aisles at Walmart or trying to figure out how to fix a paper jam, it seems like nothing's really changed. Well, what we think is that AR is going to be the way to change this. And we think that AR will be the way to essentially bridge our online interactions and user interface design in the online world with our offline interactions, which is essentially what we do every day in the real world. So that's where PlaceNote SDK comes in. If you think about AR design, we really think about two value propositions of AR. On one hand, you have the immersive 3D design. Essentially, complex 3D interactions, natural interfaces, that kind of thing. But on the other hand, and what we're really interested in, is the ability to build contextual user interfaces, right? And we think about mobile AR a lot. If you think about mobile AR, there's 500 million devices out there. But we think that they're really underutilized, and we think that people really underestimate the power of mobile AR. Mainly because most people are trying to build really intricate 3D models and really intricate 3D experiences when mobile isn't really the best solution or the best platform for it, right? Like there's limited field of view, there's limited computation, and the more complex your 3D model, it really looks crap. So what we really think is that the way to leverage mobile is to build simple contextual user interfaces for the physical world. And that's what my talk is really about, is how do you leverage mobile to build really simple interactions that don't rely on complex 3D models to build an interesting product. So let me tell you a bit of a story of how we got started here. Last year, my colleagues and I were talking about the Airbnb check-in experience. And one of the things that really annoyed us was that when you think about walking into a new Airbnb, you start with trying to figure out how to check in. Sometimes there's a key hidden under the mat, right? And sometimes you've got to enter through the back entrance and not the front entrance because there's someone else living there. When you walk in, where is the thermostat, right? I mean, this kind of stuff gets really, really annoying when walking into a new Airbnb. So we thought, why can't that be simplified? Why can't we build a really simple step-by-step check-in process in AR that would let you walk into a new Airbnb and just figure out where everything is? And the screenshot you see was actually an example that was put out by a designer in Italy that got us really excited. Because what it really showed is, hey, here's a mock example of a host kind of setting up this really interesting user-friendly interface for a guest to walk in and just get their bearings in an Airbnb instantly. So we thought, OK, this is a mock example. It can't really be built right now because, as you know, ARKit is primarily built for the 3D visualization use case. So you can place a 3D model on a plane, but that plane is really in an arbitrary point based on where you started. Right? There's no real, you can't really save content in a physical space of any sort. So we thought, OK, we've got a background in computer vision. How can we kind of put something together that would make it really easy for guests to find their way around? So if you've lived in enough Airbnbs, you've probably noticed that some hosts will put post-it notes at relevant points in an Airbnb to help guests sort of figure out where everything is. So we thought, could we actually digitize the post-it note experience in an Airbnb? And so we came up with something like this. It was a really easy way for a host to just put digital notes all around the Airbnb. So you could basically set up notes that said, OK, here's where the coffee machine is. Here's how you use it. Add a little video that kind of shows people how to use it. Here's where the thermostat is. Don't use this key, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And we thought this is a really simple, crappy little interface. But what it really showed us is the value of creating these sorts of contextual interfaces. This is the most simple thing you can think of. But it actually lets people easily navigate. And when you think about the value of post-it notes, it's all about relevant information. And that's what AR lets you do. It lets you put relevant information where it's most needed. But the benefit of using a digital medium is that this is now searchable, which means I can actually walk into any physical space and say, find me where the washroom is, or find me where the thermostat is, and it will actually guide me there. So after we built this, we sort of started expanding on that idea. And one of the things we realized is that the ability to create spatial user interfaces goes beyond just the Airbnb check-in experience. I mean, think about something like this. We use the same post-it model to actually let facilities managers share information with operators that come in to either conduct maintenance operations or repairs. And we started working with a couple of enterprise application developers to let them essentially build really neat little punch lists style apps that would let them build AR interfaces for apps where you traditionally have blueprints to show you, where the issue you're actually looking at is. And then we expanded beyond that. Like, what happens now if you take this model and expand it to a larger space? So think about the largest AR app you can think of. I think it's really Google Maps, because in Google Maps what you have is digital information fused with the real world using some sort of location context, using GPS. And so we thought, OK, if the largest way to incorporate the real world into an AR app is navigation, well, what does that look like in AR? Right? When you think about 2D, the standard paradigm we think of in terms of navigation is just arrows and points of interest. Right? So what does that look like in AR? So we started working with museums and trying to build interesting navigation experiences indoors. And one of the things we found was that after we built AR experiences with arrows, they just didn't seem to be as compelling as they could be on a mobile device. And so we thought, OK, what if we change the model a little bit from a simple navigational utility to something that leverages storytelling in a better way? Because that's really where AR shines. As if you look at this example, here's a navigation app where we literally just replace the arrows with a little tour guide that can walk you around an office space, point you in different directions, and it actually replaces points of interest with these badges that are kind of spatially oriented in the real world. And so it's literally the exact same navigation app, but with a little more spruce added in AR. So we then expanded that idea to museums. When you think about points of interest, it's really about creating clickable interfaces in the real world. So in this example, we actually used augmented reality to create simple clickable buttons that curators could use beside artifacts to replace some of the content that they actually add on little text panels that no one really reads beside the artifacts. And it really frees people to tell stories in ways that they couldn't before, because all of a sudden you can now use all this multimedia content that you have that you never could use before because you were restricted to the real estate on your panels. So we started working with a number of museums to do things like scavenger hunts, exploratory tours, and just linear guided tours to try to learn about the ways in which AR could be applied to actually build interesting indoor experiences, location-based experiences. So and we learned a lot of things, right? So one of the interesting things we learned was that in the previous example with the robot, it was great. It made it really interesting. But what happened was people focused so much on the robot that they forgot about what was around them. And so they started walking around just staring at a tablet. And that wasn't great, right? So we had to then iterate on that to try to make something where we could let people essentially focus on the robot when they were walking and let them kind of focus around the robot and essentially hide the tour guide when it was time to look around. So if you think about the way, if you've played Pokemon Go, which you probably have, the way Pokemon Go works is that you have some amount of time spent in 2D, in a 2D map, and some amount of time catching a Pokemon. And that balance between 2D and AR 3D is, I think, one of the key aspects of designing on mobile. So that's one of the things that we sort of almost verified using this kind of method. So if you look at all the examples I showed you, none of them actually had beautiful 3D models. And this isn't a painting coming to life like you might expect in some of the museum AR exhibits you've seen. It's really about creating very simple 3D interactions that actually just reduce the barrier between people and information. And that's what mobile is great at. And so I think that's, when you think about building mobile AR apps, that's where I think the value really lies. So let's talk a bit about how to build contextual user interfaces in a physical space. So I talked about Google Maps, right? In Google Maps, the way you incorporate the real world into your app, into the Google Maps app, is through GPS, right? GPS and maps tell you exactly where you are. It turns out that in AR, GPS isn't enough because you just don't have the level of accuracy that you need to actually place something in AR and have it stay there. It turns out what you really need is a way to visually locate yourself within a physical space. The way AR content is localized in spaces right now is primarily using markers. So as soon as you look at a marker, the camera sort of knows where it is relative to that marker, and you can now render your AR content there. When it comes to physical spaces, what you really need to do is be able to turn any physical space into a sort of marker. And so that's basically what PlaceNote does. PlaceNote is an SDK that lets developers and designers essentially take any physical space, map it, and turn it into a marker or a canvas to then position AR content. The way you actually incorporate the real world is fairly simple. The way we do it is essentially scan any physical space. So what that is if you see the green points, what that really shows is what's happening under the hood. We can essentially scan a physical space and turn it into special markers that represent that space. And after that space is mapped, all you need to do is add AR content to it. And what PlaceNote does is the next time anyone holds their phone up or approaches that space, it will automatically figure out exactly where you are based on a matching between the map that was created and what's being viewed right now. And so in general, when building contextual user interfaces, what you need to do is map a physical space and then use that as a platform to then create content. So throughout the process of kind of building these kinds of location-based apps, we realized that there are really two kinds of location-based apps. One is the Airbnb example, where the host or the user is really mapping something and creating content. And so it's fairly dynamic in the sense that you're constantly adding new maps to the system. If you think about the way Google Maps works, there's one big map, right? It's the whole world. But in the context of AR, that's not the case because you could create single isolated maps in rooms or in this conference center, for example. And the second is a more static example, where in the case of a museum, you have a map that's built out throughout the museum, and you have static content, or that could be your navigation app, or it could be your scavenger hunt, or whatever, that's placed throughout the museum. And so when you think about building location-based apps, there are different ways to build each and different limitations for each. And so you got to think about exactly what you want to do to kind of put these together. And PlaceNote really lets you build both. So just some quick stats on PlaceNote. PlaceNote is now at 400 developers. We have collectively built 2,500 maps. So it's, if you're looking to check out how to build location-based apps with PlaceNote, all you need to do is visit placenote.com and check out what we've been up to. And just a note about the future to close my talk. If you think about location-based apps like Foursquare out there, really what they're about is they incorporate location, but it's also about connecting with people. We think that AR can kick that up to a notch. And we think that location-based social experiences are really the future of AR. So here's a quick example of a multiplayer AR experience built with PlaceNote. And this is sort of the first multiplayer FPS game that was built specifically in a location using PlaceNote. And what I'm really excited to announce is that this app is actually going to be up on the App Store within a week for everyone to try. And this was built specifically with PlaceNote. So if you want to check out how to build multiplayer games with PlaceNote or multiplayer location-based experiences, check out placenote.com, or you can email me at neil@placenote.com. Thank you.
Oh, thank you very much, Neil. We have some time left for some questions. Okay, I'll bring you a microphone.
Hey, Neil.
Hey.
Great product. How long does it take to generate the cloud map for the actual data aggregation?
Yeah, so I can give you an example. Like this room would actually take approximately 2 to 4 minutes. It's a fairly quick scanning process. I mean, I understand it isn't actually, it's not scalable to the point where you can build an experience as large as this conference center just as yet. But it works best in spaces that are approximately 1,000 square feet right now. So when it comes to navigation apps, the way we do it is that we actually use multiple smaller maps spread out across the area that you can use to kind of load up as you walk along the area. And I can kind of talk about that with you after as well.
Hi, Neil. I just had a quick question. The scanning process, how faithful does it have to remain in order for the user to actually interact with the map after the fact? So in that example that you gave, if the seat had moved,
Right.
2 feet to the right, so how?
Right.
how
Yeah, so the way it works right now is that the map needs to be at least 40% similar. So it can handle up to 50 to 60% changes in the environment because it's really not looking for a perfect match. It's looking for a partial match. Now, right now, the way it works is that once you build a map, that map is fairly static in the sense that we can't update the map through dynamic sessions and that kind of thing. But that's kind of where it's headed, is that what you need to do is if your map, for example, changes 30% and you have a user use it there and you're able to localize in that space, during that user session, you can collect the data and use it to update the map. And so that essentially what that does is that the next time the third person uses the app, you have a much more up-to-date model of your space. It's the same way, it's really a scaled down version of the way the Google Earth model works, right? You're constantly updating little sections of the map. It's just that we haven't been able to yet build a scalable enough system for 3D data in the same way. So that's where, that's what the next step really is.
This is awesome, thank you. I'm working with a museum that wants to create an audio experience that plays different ambient soundtracks that crossfade together as you move through the museum or as you get closer to something. Mm-hmm. Is there an audio component to PlaceNote? And if not now, do you see that in the roadmap?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. Now, I've talked a lot about AR and PlaceNote in the context of AR. But PlaceNote is really, think of PlaceNote really as an indoor GPS or a completely relative GPS. The content you use to be, your content you trigger based on PlaceNote is really up to you. So what PlaceNote does is once you create a map and use that then to essentially track a device in an area, it's really just giving you location. So for example, in an audio tour that you might find in a common museum, you'd see either like an app that uses beacons, or something even simpler might be one of those dials that lets you punch in a number for the artifact and hear audio based on that artifact. You can essentially use PlaceNote purely as a location trigger mechanism. So you don't need to show any AR content. You could just be walking around and trigger audio content without actually needing to show any visuals at all.
Hi, Neil.
Hey.
How would you work with something like a vehicle where you might be outside of it, you might be inside of it, and you might want to scan one vehicle and be able to use it in multiple different vehicles?
Yeah, so right now PlaceNote works best in static spaces. It's not an object tracking system. So for example, if you wanted to create an interface under the hood where I want to find where do I add my windshield fluid, it will work implicitly, but it's not specifically built for that. Going forward, what we might look into is how do we then incorporate more object tracking as part of PlaceNote. But right now, it's specifically built for locations. you.